shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GBNews.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Good evening, it's 6 p.m. Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Now, will we ever hear the end of Brexit? New polling shows more people are in favour of rejoining the EU than ever before. That comes at the same time the British Chambers of Commerce has said 3/4 of businesses haven't seen any benefit from Brexit. They want to rethink. Perhaps it's only a matter of time until we go back to the EU with our tail between our legs and rejoin the single market and customs union. Then there have been more allegations of corruption in the honours system, particularly when it comes to peerages. Should we change the way they're dished out or just scrap the lot of them? I also want to get your thoughts on positive discrimination. Why, you may ask? Well, a Cambridge academic has said that the reputation of female academics is being tarnished as a result. Am I wrong to think that the best person for the job should always be the person chosen for the job, regardless of their skin colour, gender or whatever else? Finally, is it okay to be nasty if you happen to be left-wing? Jeremy Clarkson has, of course, taken a huge amount of heat over his comments in The Sun, but do the left get away with saying much nastier things? Remember when Joe Brand made that joke about throwing battery acid at a certain politician? All of that to come tonight on Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. First, let's get your latest news headlines.
Emily, thank you. I'm Bethany Elsey with your news from the GB newsroom. Ambulance workers from the union Unison have announced they will stage 2 further days of strike action in a dispute over pay. Thousands of staff from 5 ambulance services in England will walk out on the 11th and 23rd of January. It will affect London, Yorkshire, the North West, North East and South West. The industrial action this week has already disrupted services, with South Central Ambulance declaring a critical incident, saying patient safety could be at risk. Well, the bit of pay dispute between nurses, ambulance workers and the government is ramping up pressure on already stretched hospitals. Union leaders say the Health Secretary's refusal to discuss pay has raised the prospect of further strikes next month. But the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, says they must respect the independent pay review body.
You cannot have an independent pay review process which takes the politics out of pay and then have politicians intervening in that process. Not only does it blow the process up and destroy the process, but it also means what happens in future years. You know, is this going to be politicians now doing that? It's really important. It's been done by governments of different colours. The independent pay review process has been used pretty successfully, and that's what we want to continue.
Rail fares in England will rise by 5.9% in March. The government set the cap at a level well below inflation, with the Transport Secretary saying the intervention will help reduce the impact on passengers. It comes as rail workers get ready for more strike action, with RMT members in Scotland walking out on Christmas Eve until Tuesday morning. Air travel is also set to be affected, with around 250,000 passengers being warned of delays as Border Force staff strike from tomorrow. Travel expert Simon Calder says the situation won't improve anytime soon.
I'm afraid if you're on the rails, possibly even in the skies, then you could face serious problems. I've never seen the trains in such disarray. There is not going to be any improvement, can you believe, until the 9th of January.
Highways workers in London and South East England are also on strike until Christmas Day. The public and commercial services unions acknowledge the action will likely inconvenience travellers, but it's blaming the government for making a below-inflation pay offer. Further action is planned for next week and in the new year, unless a deal can be reached. And some news just in. The Home Office says it's deported 42 Albanian migrants back home, which it said had no right to be in the UK. The government has come under increasing pressure to prevent migrants attempting to cross the English Channel from France. The Home Office says some of those involved arrived illegally via small boats and others had been convicted of supplying Class A drugs. The Chancellor is being urged to introduce a pump pricing watchdog to crack down on profiteering retailers. In an open letter to Jeremy Hunt, MPs warn a fall in wholesale petrol and diesel prices aren't being passed on to motorists. It comes as the RAC announced the average price of a litre of petrol is currently around 153 pence. That's 7p more than this time last year, while diesel is up 27 pence at 176. The MPs say Howard Cox, the founder of Fair Fuel UK, should be the new Pump Watch Commissioner. He told GB News retailers are taking advantage of drivers.
Supermarkets buy direct from the refinery. They don't buy through the wholesaler and that sort of thing. So they're making huge profits on drivers. And that 15 to 20p equates to something like £7 to £10 per driver. Every time a driver comes into a forecourt, the retailer is wringing his hands in delight that, oh, here's another £10 worth of profit.
A murder investigation is underway after one of 3 people stabbed in Birmingham died from their injuries. 2 men and a woman were attacked in the Handsworth area in the early hours of this morning. A 24-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of murder and attempted murder. The Prime Minister has appointed a new ethics advisor. The chairman of Historic England, Sir Laurie Magnus, will replace Lord Geit, who quit under Boris Johnson in June. His job will be to advise Mr Sunak on whether ministers are obeying their Code of Conduct rulebook. You're up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News. Now let's get back to Emily.
Thank you very much. Welcome back to Dewbs & Co. with me, Emily Carver, with you until 7. Let me introduce my panel. We have Lord Daniel Moylan here with us this evening, Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, and Aaron Bastani on my left, who is the founder of Novara Media. Now, I want to get all your thoughts throughout the show. We're going to be discussing Brexit. Do you think it's time for a rethink, or do you perhaps think that the government has messed it up and they're to blame for not making the most of it? This comes, of course, after the British Chamber of Commerce has said that 3/4 of its businesses have seen no benefit from Brexit. Do you believe them? Do you think perhaps the pandemic has something to do with that and that Brexit is merely being used as some kind of scapegoat? Or do you think perhaps we need to have a little rethink when it comes to our trade dealings with the European Union? Let me know what you think. Get in touch on GB Views at gbnews.uk or on Twitter at GBNews. Now, Lord Daniel, what do you think? Brexit. Do you think that the government has made a bit of a mess of it?
Well, Brexit was a big constitutional change where we transferred responsibility for our laws from the European Union back to our own democratically elected House of Commons and Parliament. And that's happened. That's actually happened. Now, what policies the government...
Nearly 3 years ago now.
Well, whatever. The beginning of 2020, 2 years ago. Now, that policy, that change means governments are free and parliaments are free to choose the laws they want to make. And that's according to how they're elected. And sometimes they're going to do really brilliant things with those laws, and sometimes they'll do things that are not that brilliant. And sometimes you'll have a Prime Minister from a good party, like the Conservatives, and sometimes you could have had Jeremy Corbyn. So you'll get different policies, and you'll get different disagreements about what those policies should be, and some people will like them and some people won't. So the idea that Brexit is a whole package, a whole economic package, it's setting a direction, all of that's been wrong. The British Chamber of Commerce and Industry has campaigned against Brexit day in, day out, right the way back to 2016.
Yes, they did oust one of their leaders, did they not, who had spoken in favour of Brexit?
They did, and they've carried on campaigning against it, and this is just another part of their propaganda war. There are many companies in this country who have exported outside the EU. They've exported to America, they've exported to other countries around the world. They haven't been part of a single market, but they've successfully exported before we left the European Union and since. They show it can be done. And I think the British Chamber of Commerce should be tying up its successful exporting members with those who are struggling and saying, buddy them up, and actually saying you can learn from each other and do something good and practical, instead of keeping up this relentless campaign of gloom and declinism, which they've been at now for, 6 years.
Aaron, do you think that's fair? Do you think this is part of a propaganda war from the British Chambers of Commerce, trying to talk down our country?
A propaganda war is perhaps an overstatement. I would agree that clearly they've had a political position on this for a period of time.
Yes.
In their defence, they would say that's because they represent their members who have a certain set of views on this. But quickly on what Lord Daniels said in regards to sometimes you'll have good and bad politicians, but the point is sovereignty isn't at Westminster. With Brexit, what I think has been exposed to an extraordinary extent is just how poor our political class is. Because unlike since the period, really, since we joined in the early 1970s, there is no longer an excuse. There is no longer a bogeyman. We can't do trade, we can't do immigration policy, we can't do public ownership, we can't do all these things you want because we're tied up in this big organisation. That's now gone, and the spotlight instead is on the government and the opposition, and most people actually think they're not particularly good at solving problems, and I think that's correct.
I think there's some truth to that. I'm not sure why, if you believe that to be the case, you'd want to go forward with nationalisation and putting more power in the hands of our useless politicians.
Well, I'd like different
consider them to be so. Different politicians, different outcomes, presumably. What do you make of the fact that new polling shows that more people than ever before would like to see us give it all up and actually go back to the European Union, tails between our legs, and rejoin the customs union and single market?
I haven't seen that polling. I've seen polling that says there's a majority of people who now think it was a bad decision, and I think that partly reflects changes in demography. I don't think it's very...
Yes, younger people are voters now.
I haven't seen people a great surge in support for rejoining, which is a very different thing. It's one thing to say, I regret divorcing my wife. It's a different thing to say, I want to get back and, we're going to live together and get married again. That's a big...
Very true.
Two very different things. I think it's partly a matter of demography. But I also think you've got to be realistic about it. The decision for us to rejoin the European Union, if that ever came about, that decision is not going to be made in Britain. That decision is made by the 27 EU states. They are the only people who can agree, and they have to agree unanimously, that a new member state can join. All we can do is vote to apply. And we have a long history before I was a child. We've been turned down for joining the European Union more often than we've been allowed in. And so I don't think that just because we think somehow we're God's gift to the European Union, we're going to vote that we want to rejoin, and they're going to say, that's tremendous. No, not necessarily.
And what would we actually have to accept if we were to reapply?
Well,
I think this will happen, but if we were...
I don't know, because the European Union... Well, of course we'd have to join the euro, but the European Union is evolving and changing, of course. And what we'd have to accept at the time when we made such a decision, which I think might be decades down the road anyway, what we'd have to accept would be very, very different then. But you are right. Fundamentally, we'd be voting to go with our tail between our legs. That's the phrase you used right at the outset. And I don't think the British people are ever going to vote to humiliate themselves that way.
I don't think so either. But Aaron, I'm a bit confused by Labour's stance on this. Can you enlighten me? You know people within the Labour Party. Keir Starmer, it's confusing insofar as trust goes, let's say. Keir Starmer, of course, well known for leaving the Corbyn government or resigning from his position as, I believe, Shadow Immigration Minister at the time because he was so against Brexit. He then campaigned for a second referendum or a confirmatory referendum or whatever he called it at the time. And now he's saying no chance of any renegotiation. We don't want to join the single market. Customs union, don't want freedom of movement. What's going on there?
Well, I think the obvious explanation for me is that prior to 2019, he said things and he had a position which was politically expedient for him within the party.
Yes.
His ambition has been to be the party leader. And now his ambition is to be the Prime Minister. And so we have an injection of realism. And of course, in 2016, 400 seats voted to leave. He's fully aware that if he wants to be Prime Minister with a majority, he can't back a second referendum. What I find interesting is...
But once he's in power...
I don't think he would... he'd become very unpopular very quickly. I don't think he would reverse on this. The reversal's already been done. But I think the big problem for Labour is the fact now he's massively overcompensating onto the previous position. He's now, in many respects, more pro-Brexit than a certain wing of the Conservative Party. There's a wing of the Conservative Party which wants a customs union or single market access, and he's saying absolutely not. Brexit has no impact on the sort of economic circumstances Britain confronts right now, which I don't think anybody thinks, whether you're positive or negative around Brexit. Clearly, it's a variable. So I think that's the big problem for Labour now, is the single market and the customs union stuff.
It's not the broader problem with our political establishment or our politicians that while many of them have accepted the result, at least as they say, are they in the right frame of mind to actively try and make the best of it?
No.
No. Simple as that, no.
Simple as that, no. Clearly not. Well, I don't know whether you've got to ask them all. I mean, Aaron and I come from very different perspectives on the world, and we're in great danger of agreeing a bit too much for the excitement of this show. I think it's not just a question of changing politicians. It's also a question of, and I don't mean changing government, because obviously we want a Conservative government, that's the right thing for the country, but our processes, our lawmaking processes are all very weak as well. Our civil service doesn't work properly. Number 10's relationship to the rest of the cabinet doesn't work properly anymore. A lot of this was wrecked by Tony Blair and Gordon Brown quite deliberately, and a new way of working hasn't been put back together. So I think a lot of thought needs to go into those things. It's a bit boring to say that. I know, but it's very important. How you make decisions is very important to getting good decisions out of the process, and we don't do that very well.
Now,
either.
if we're going to have too much agreement, I'm going to go to some of our viewers and see what they're thinking. Alan has said, and I'm going to get it up on the screen at home. It's coming. Alan says, what Brexit? 3 years of COVID nonsense, that's all we've had. And I think that's kind of true. Could it be that Brexit is being used as a scapegoat by some who were never supportive of Brexit to begin with? Paul echoes that. He says that Brexit hasn't had a chance to work because of the pandemic. Darren says the benefit of Brexit isn't monetary anyway. The benefit is having our laws, our own laws and borders under our control. Well, that's a bit of a joke, isn't it? Our borders have never been more porous, it seems.
Yeah, but you see, there's a difference, isn't there, between making decisions and who makes the decisions for you, and implementing the decisions. And if you live on an island and the coast is, and the sea is very narrow, then you're going to be exposed to something. We were very good at working with the French, at stopping people coming through the tunnel, through the trains, on the roads, in the lorries. That's sort of been built out. And so what's happened is that these people traffickers, these sort of, these travel agents is what they are, legal travel agents charging high fees for people to get on unsafe boats. These people moved to the sea crossing. And it's very much more difficult there because you can't just build a wall and keep people out and then, say, drop them in the sea if their boat capsizes. So it is more difficult. I'm encouraged to see some people at least have been returned today to Albania. Some of them were not illegal immigrants as such. They were people who finished a prison sentence here and were being deported.
Yes, well, some progress on that front may be being made, although I'm not convinced
but a very small
much is going to change
so far. Yes.
Aaron, just in terms of going back to Brexit, what would you personally like to see happen?
Well, I think in the immediate term, one thing you can do is VAT. Small and medium-sized businesses are being hammered, and there were sort of, well, I'm not sure Lord Morlin will know this better than I will, but there were moves really to harmonisation around VAT. And I think right now you could say, actually, we want VAT of 10% as a short to medium-term measure, 6 months, 12 months, because there are businesses on the high streets now being smashed. And I think that's the bare minimum we could do. Now, look, we could do that inside the EU as well. We did it under the Brown government after the financial crisis in 2007-8. But that's the kind of thing where actually we can move away from the European consensus on. Another one is public ownership and state aid. There are rules around state aid in the European Union which tie the hands of member states, which we're no longer subject to.
Yes, that's very true.
And that's positive for, people on my side of the sort of political pitch who believe in public ownership.
Right, well, we've got some more views coming in, and they're quite strong, actually. Betty says, I would rather eat a frog than rejoin the EU. I think that's what a lot of people watching will probably think. Also, it would be a bit embarrassing, wouldn't it? That our politicians haven't been able to make the most of it as they promised us. And so we go back with our begging bowl or whatever you'd like to call it. And then finally, Mark says, great to leave and never want to return. There's some balance from our GB viewers coming up as former members of the Honours Committee claim they came under pressure to pass certain appointments. We're asking, is the Honours system still fit for purpose? Stay tuned for that.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens,
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for Gloria Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Yes, welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. With me until 7, my lovely panel, Lord Daniel Moylan, Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, and Aaron Bastani, who is the founder of Novara Media. Now, you've been getting in touch to give me your view on Brexit. It seems like the overwhelming number of you are in support of Brexit, and you would rather eat a frog than rejoin the European Union. At least that's what Betty said. Anyway, now we're going to be moving on to something quite different. Members of the Government Honours Committee have told a Channel 4 investigation they came under pressure to pass certain appointments or rewards, particularly those for Tory donors. With controversy surrounding Boris Johnson's resignation honours list, is the system fit for purpose or should it be overhauled? Now, do you think that perhaps there is a danger that we decide to overhaul everything, the honours system, also the way that we appoint peerages, for very little benefit?
Well, we've already had an overhaul. We had an overhaul under Blair. The responsibility for appointing people to the House of Lords and to the honours system, because the two are really separate in a way. If you get an OBE, that's a reward for something you've done, and you get letters after your name, and you get a medal and so on. If you are put into the House of Lords nowadays, there are very few people put into the House of Lords as an honour. You're put in to do a job nowadays. You do work in the House of Lords. That's what you're expected to do. But we overhauled it under Blair, so it was all taken away from the Prime Minister, partly, and put into the hands of these independent advisers and these committees and so on. Who are these people? These people who are accountable to nobody. part of Brexit was that we should make things more democratic. It should go back to being a prime ministerial responsibility with his own honours secretariat, which he always used to have, his own honours secretariat, and then he or she is accountable for the decisions they make, and they can be judged for the decisions they make, rather than dispersing it around these trumped-up sort of independent persons who only whinge when their advice isn't taken.
Yes, Aaron, are they getting a bit uppity, this honours committee?
Who are they?
Why should they necessarily have more of a right than the Prime Minister himself, for example, to choose who gets these types of honours?
Well, I'm a unicameralist. I don't think we should have a second chamber. I think it's a leftover from the 19th century. There are
anything to replace it?
No, you don't need it.
Don't need it.
Because right now, what does it do? It suggests amendments, but it can't generate new legislation. It can't really set the political agenda. I don't really see the argument for it. And that applies, by the way, to the Labour proposal. I like the Labour proposal compared to the status quo purely because there's fewer of them. I think the fact we have, I believe it's the second largest legislature in the world, the largest in China. The fact that the largest one outside of an autocracy is here in the UK, I think, is an embarrassment, frankly, for 21st century Britain.
Now, Lindsay Hoyle has said that an elected second chamber, which is one option being proposed, of course, would lead to confusion over where ultimate power lies. To me, it would just make things more complicated. You'd have much more turmoil. You wouldn't know what law was going to be passed when. At least now our elected officials have more of a say within the Commons.
Look, there's a strong argument for having an elected upper chamber. I don't agree with Aaron about having a single chamber because I think nowadays the demands on MPs are so great that they have very little time for actually focusing on legislation. And they spend so much time now almost as social workers for their constituents and running to and fro. And I don't think they have enough time to do the detailed legislative work, which just means government would just ram things through that would never get properly scrutinised. That's the job the House of Lords does. But of course you can have, there's an argument for an elected upper house, but you need to understand what is it you want it to do. And if you want it to carry on scrutinising legislation, but now with the authority of having been directly elected, then Lindsay Hoyle is right. You are going to get a sort of clash. Now, you can work this out. Other countries have got 2 elected chambers. They have to work it out and pass something. But it definitely slows down lawmaking, as you see in the United States, and it means you get an awful lot of compromises, pork barrel, type politics and so on, as people trade things off. But that's the price you pay, and you can make the system work. But it is a dramatic change, and it definitely undermines the authority of the elected House of Commons, which, of course, Lindsay Hoyle, as Speaker, is meant to be there to defend anyway. So that's, I suppose, is his excuse for getting involved in this. The Gordon Brown thing I thought was hopeless. He didn't want it to be a legislature. He just wanted it to be a devolution talking shop. I couldn't see the point of having something like that. As far as the numbers are concerned, we used to say that the NHS was the largest employer in the world after the Soviet Red Army. And people on the left thought that was upsetting. So now they say, oh, well, it's the largest legislature outside China and this is embarrassing. The fact is, it's a part-time role. So you can do it full-time if you want. You can do it less. There's no salary. You don't draw any money from it unless you're actually there doing the work. So if you stop going or you do something else, you're free to do that. But then you have no say in what's going on because you're not there to involve it. I think, in big companies, they talk about the number of staff as full-time equivalents because they add up the number of full-time staff and then the number of part-timers and they make them into full-time equivalents. If you might have 800 in the House of Lords, but you probably have about 400 full-time equivalents, and I think you need at least 400 in order to handle the volume of legislation that comes through. Remember, we don't have a staff, we don't have secretaries, we don't have researchers. We have to do everything ourselves. So if you're working on a bill, you have to do it all yourself, and it takes a lot of time. You can't be on every bill at the same time.
I think what frustrates a lot of ordinary people watching the House of Lords is that there's always political bias or accusations of political bias. For example, when it came to Brexit, the accusation was that the Lords was trying to thwart Brexit over and over and over again.
Still is, actually.
Pardon?
They still are, actually.
Yes, still. Yeah. So what do we do about that?
Well, like I say, get rid of them.
Well, if we've got the system we have,
the thing is...
Should we avoid political appointees completely?
Well, I would agree with some of the things Lord Daniels said in regards to, for instance, changes brought about by Blair. I think there's far too... It goes both ways. So now we have, for instance, a Prime Minister who has far too much oversight with regards to senior civil servants, specifically special advisors. And then, like you say, when it comes to accountability and what matters, legislators, they're not where they should be.
We really are Quango Britain.
We are.
Yeah,
independent
we're
body Britain.
Independent
They run the shop,
body
not...
Britain. And we really need to tackle this because these people...
Very quickly, I'll let Aaron finish what you're saying.
They have great power and no accountability. And they think they're the bee's knees. We're independent. We're marvellous.
They really do. I don't like the term independent.
No, they're not independent.
When it comes to these bodies, because I don't believe they can possibly be independent. Everyone has their biases, do they not?
Well, it's like the independent pay review bodies now with the public sector. It covers 45% of the public sector. There's 9 of them, right? And even if you think we should have independent pay review bodies, why do we need 9? Why can't we just have 1? And then you've got the chair is determined by the Prime Minister or the relevant Secretary of State, I believe. And the relevant Secretary of State determines all the other people on these review panels. And I just think, only in Britain would you get so much bureaucracy that does so little and is so ineffective. I mean, it's just remarkable. You see it time after time in public life.
Also, it's very interesting. If you look at the figures, Tony Blair created 374 life peerages. First to David Cameron, who was 245. And then they were told by the Lord Speaker's Committee that they needed to stop creating so many and that there was a sort of 1 in, 2 out, or
that doesn't apply anymore. The Prime Ministers haven't applied that recently. Theresa May was the last one to do so. Remember, Tony Blair removed... I mean, the House of Lords used to have over 1,000 members. Tony Blair removed the hereditary peers, all bar 92 of them, and then filled it all up with his mates. That's why he was creating so many.
Well, this is the thing. This is the allegation of corruption.
No, I didn't say that. I didn't say that. There was an investigation of potentially selling peerages into Tony Blair. He was cleared. I'm not suggesting corruption. Corruption involves selling an office. That's a crime. To sell a peerage is a crime in this country. And I'm not suggesting that is happening, or any Prime Minister has done that. But it's a question of putting in, filling up people who are like-minded with you, which is why we have such a left-wing House of Lords at the moment. People probably think the House of Lords is full of crusty old Tories and right-wing headbangers like me. Believe me, I am in a deep minority in the House of Lords, surrounded by all these lefties.
I see that in the way some legislation is scrutinised or not. Let's see what people are saying at home. Gordon says, bang on Bastani. Who needs any of them? Fair play. I think people are,
We want some legislators.
In agreement with you, Aaron.
That's good to hear. I mean,
it's nice you want some.
What Lord Daniel is saying is, it's interesting because I don't dispute there are some very committed, talented legislators in the House of Lords, but I think there are far too many bag carriers.
Far too many bag carriers. I'm sorry, our graphics aren't going onto the screen this evening, but I can read them out anyway. Adam says the House of Lords should be scrapped. Jola says an elected House of Lords. We have an elected House of Commons and we wouldn't want to replicate that. Martin says, I think the House of Lords should go as it costs us a fortune and they serve little purpose, especially when getting paid to fall asleep. Have you ever fallen asleep at the wheel?
I haven't actually fallen asleep in public. There have
been many pictures, haven't there not, of Lords having a little snooze?
No, I haven't fallen asleep, I'm glad to say. It is actually genuinely very, very interesting. But remember, you don't get paid if you don't turn up. And I think it's unfair to say there are a lot of bag carriers. It's a life appointment. That, I think, is something that you need to take into account. And people, as they get older, some of them stop going, and many of them now retire. Since 2014, there's been an option to retire from the House of Lords, which people take. Before that, you couldn't actually retire. You couldn't leave. And you might think, well, maybe they should be appointed for a period of a term of, say, 15 years or something like that. Not just 5 years, I think a longer term. And that might make some sense. Of course, when we had hereditary peers, there used to be a lot of young people in the House of Lords. That's all gone now.
I don't mind the idea of hereditary peers in a way. I think I'd prefer them to political appointments because at least perhaps the idea is that they have a sense of duty. Perhaps some of us, our political appointments don't have, but maybe that's a bit of a controversial opinion.
They have some interesting backgrounds as well.
Very interesting backgrounds. I'd like to see genuine experts of all walks of life filling up those
Would you?
seats.
Would you?
I think so.
I don't think there's any argument for having genuine experts,
We don't like
so-called,
experts.
filling up the House of Lords. If you were to have a bunch of experts appointed by a committee of experts, which is where you're going, I would say straight away, no, I want an elected upper house. Let us at least, if we're going to do that, democracy, a democratic house is a much better,
And I can see that.
much better case for that than for a bunch of independent experts appointing a bunch of independent experts. Accountable to nobody at any stage.
I take your point. We're going to have to move on from peerages and the honour system. Coming up, does positive discrimination work? A Cambridge professor says the reputation of women academics could be risked by fears they haven't been promoted on merit. We'll discuss that after the break. Stay tuned.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Mark Stein. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
Why not take us home with you by visiting the GB News shop at gbnews.store? You'll find all the official merchandise, a really good present actually for yourself, your friends or your family.
We ship across the UK mainland at no extra cost. GB News, the People's Channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Yes, well, lots of you have been getting in touch about what we were talking about to begin with. Brexit, has it been a benefit? Is it time for a rethink? Or are people just using it as a scapegoat to attack because of other things that are going on in our economy, not least what happened over the course of the pandemic and the bill that we're suffering as a result? Kerry says the honour system was never fit for purpose. And Pam says the Lords is not fit for purpose if it allows Tom Watson a seat. So there you go. People have particular views on particular politicians that make it into the House of Lords, and that may sway your opinion on it. I also think, as we were discussing in the break, that it has a lot to do with Brexit and how the Lords were seen to attempt again and again to thwart it. So we're going to be moving on to women. In a way, should we favour women or people from ethnic minorities when making appointments or hiring people? It's a practice euphemistically called positive discrimination, and one academic has called it into question. The philosophy professor at Cambridge University says the reputations of women academics are tainted because nobody can be sure if they attained their position on merit. Aaron, positive discrimination is just discrimination, isn't it?
It's also illegal. That's why I don't quite understand.
Seems to happen all the time.
Positive discrimination in this country is illegal under the 2010 Equality Act. So the idea that people get a job or a position on the basis of their skin colour or gender is a criminal offence. You can't do it. What you can do is something called positive action, which is when you have two candidates broadly the same merit, same CV, and of course you rarely get that in life, but you have a bunch of things going the way of one candidate, a bunch of things going the way of the other. There's kind of a toss-up. At Novara Media, we have, about 30 people there. We recruit people. I've seen that many times. In that set of circumstances, then yes, you can choose a person of colour or a woman. But actual
Hang on. Let me stop you there, because if let's say, in a parallel universe, I applied to Novara Media as a young, budding socialist.
Fantastic.
Yes?
Yep.
I applied to Novara Media, and I get to the final two, and the other candidate happens to be a black woman. So I may as well just withdraw my application. Doesn't seem fair, does it?
No, there's a whole range of things that we look at. So, for instance, you might have two great candidates, and the older one is better than the younger one, but you think, well, this one's 5 years younger. They're sort of broadly the same, but you know what? We can work with them, and by the time that this person is that person,
so you're ageist too.
No, it's not about age, because they're the same calibre of candidates. That's positive action. That's legal.
Oh, I really don't like positive action either.
But that's legal.
It seems to be the same thing by a different name, does it not?
Well, the way Aaron describes it, it does. I think there are things you can say. And I think I'm delighted to let Aaron... he's thinking in this, in Novara Media. We're going to finding out a whole load of stuff about Novara Media's recruitment policies that I don't think he should have thought carefully about. And I want to say there are positive actions you can take that I encourage. I mean, you want to encourage a broad range of people to apply, and you want to encourage people who feel, and this is the big problem in this country, who feel that job's not for me, I'll never get it, but you want to encourage them to apply. Remember, that isn't just people who are in protected categories under the 2010 Equality Act. The people with the most unpositive views of themselves are actually white working class boys. And they should be encouraged to apply for jobs as well, because they're the ones who actually rule themselves out from the start. So I'm happy to have positive action which opens things up, makes it clear that these things don't matter, that the important thing is merit and ability, and the capacity for the role, the capacity for growth and development, as Aaron says, is important. I think you're right. I don't know what this Cambridge professor is thinking of particularly. If you ever did have genuine positive discrimination, which is, as Aaron says, not allowed at the moment, then I think absolutely you would have a case where people would say you got the job even though you weren't the best candidate.
I don't buy this idea.
And that's what they'd say, and that has a danger. And we tread at the moment, employers tread along a very fine line, not doing positive discrimination but doing positive action. And, of course, if they trip over that line, they will damage the people they're appointing, because people will say that.
Well, yes,
apart from running into trouble with the law, possibly.
I have a little quibble with the idea that this is banned under the Equality Act, positive discrimination, because there are stories after stories. There was only one from last week in one of the Yorkshire local papers about a white man who was turned down from the police force, I think, because they were only hiring women and ethnic minorities at that point to reflect the makeup of the area or whatever justification they gave. Surely that is simply reverse racism and discrimination.
Well, there was a case in 2018 where it's precisely this. A white man applied to be a police officer and he was rejected, and there were several people from ethnic minorities who weren't. And I believe, to the best of my recollection, he won. It is a criminal offence. So if you're recruiting at GB News and somebody says to their, you've got your CEO, and they say, we're only going to hire a woman for this job, or we're only going to hire a brown person for this job, or a white person, it could be anything, that is illegal. And if the people being interviewed get a sniff of that and they believe they've been discriminated against on the basis of their skin colour, age, etc., they can take that up. And like I say, that's precisely what happened in 2018. The police officer had his day in court and he was found to be in the right, or a person with a desire to be a police officer. He didn't actually become a police officer.
But do you also think, would you say that businesses run by private individuals have some moral duty to be ethnically and demographically representative of the area they're in? We don't go into black-run businesses and say, oh, you need to hire some more white people.
I think all employers and people in authority have a responsibility to be fair. It's a function of distributive justice, that they should treat the people who work for them or who want to work for them on a fair and equal basis, on merits that are to do with things that are relevant to the job. And I think we're all agreed that some things are relevant. If you're hiring carpenters, you want people who are skilled in carpentry, you want people with a certain level of education. Other things aren't relevant, like your skin colour. And for the vast majority of jobs, and I think nearly all jobs now, it shouldn't matter what sex you are, gender orientation, things like that. I think we've got a very clunky law. I think the Equality Act 2010 is a pretty catastrophic piece of legislation.
Yes.
But for implementing that principle, the principle is absolutely right, that people in authority need to behave in a just and fair fashion towards those whom they're employing. I don't think that means necessarily that small businesses need to go around individually reflecting the local composition, but the police force have a particular interaction with the community, which obviously dominates their thinking. Anyway, the police are totally woke at the top
But it happens
nowadays,
in every
they're woke on everything
in every
nowadays,
department,
so
really.
I'm
I don't know.
I'm not speaking up for the police.
I don't know if you've looked at application forms for the civil service, for example, but there's about 5 pages of tick box exercises over whether you have a disability, what your sexual orientation is, what your ethnicity is, where your parents came from, all of this.
But there is a box, I think, that says don't wish to say on most of those.
Meritocracy should be the only thing that matters, and I know that's obviously flawed too in this country, but I really don't like this idea. And also, again, the Equality Act is simply not true, because I remember being in sixth form at school, and there were so many different schemes available for women only, or ethnic minorities only, graduate schemes or whatever else. I can't get my head around how that's allowed. And what about white working class boys who are always down at the bottom when it comes to, you know, educational outcomes and whatnot?
Well, I totally agree. I think working class should be included in that too. I think if you're an organisation full of middle class people, I think, and you're saying, well, look, how can we be more diverse as an organisation? I think absolutely class belongs alongside race and gender. But just finally, diversity is actually a real strength for businesses, because if you're an organisation or a business and you're 20 guys and you're trying to sell stuff to the public at large, it's not going to hurt to have a couple of women work for you, because 50% of the public is women. So I don't think we should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think the principle of having diverse organisations is it generally helps those organisations too. So this idea that it's just a bolt-on as a part of sort of public relations, I think that's a shame, because actually it does benefit businesses and
I
organisations.
know, but it's quite funny because some of these big corporates have these great diversity schemes, and then they just happen to get, you know, a privately educated Asian woman who's had every advantage in life available to them, has parents who were doctors or whatnot, and there's no class diversity there. It just so happens that they are a different
that's a very
skin
important
colour.
point.
And then that's reflected in their business, and they can tick that box. Anyway, we're going to have to move on to our final topic. Coming up to round off the show, we're asking a simple question: who's nastier in politics, the left or the right? Stay tuned for that. We'll have 2 very different views on that.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents. Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing. You see, amazing.
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
My name's Tom Harwood, and join me 9:30 a.m. every weekday for The Briefing, your one-stop shop for everything you need to know about what's going on in politics today.
I wonder if this is a deal that might need to be like the biscuits in this factory, twice baked.
Is there not an opportunity here to win out against the extremes?
Tom Harwood, GB News.
What are you going to do about it?
Things should have been done differently, and they certainly are being done differently.
Don't miss it. The Briefing with me, Tom Harwood, 9:30 Monday to Friday on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. I'm with you until 7 and with my panel, of course, Lord Daniel Moylan, Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, and Aaron Bastani, who is the founder of Novara Media. We've got some very good views this evening. It's been commented on by some of you at home that we're getting a real balance on all of our topics, so that's good stuff. That's what GB News is here for. Anyway, we're going to be moving on to a bit of another touchy subject, perhaps. I don't know what you think about this, but is it OK in our society to be nasty if you happen to be left-wing? This, of course, comes after Jeremy Clarkson got a huge amount of heat for that Sun column he wrote about Meghan Markle. There were calls for him to go to prison for hate crime for his satirical, if rather vulgar and offensive article that he wrote. But in the past, Joe Brand, for example, suggested throwing battery acid at, I believe, Nigel Farage, who will be coming up later. And nothing really happened. Even BBC Radio 4 didn't even apologise because they just said, you know, it's part of provocative humour. That's the point of the show. Is it the point of a Sun article to also be sometimes offensive in order to make a point? What do you think, Aaron? Do you think the left are nastier? And do you think they get away with being nasty?
No, I don't think that. I think we've come off an article here which is written by somebody, and it's had, I think, it's the largest number of complaints ever to IPSO, which is the press regulator for print media in this country. There's 20,000 complaints.
People are such snowflakes.
Who complains to IPSO? Who complains to IPSO?
Well,
Who even knows the address of IPSO? Who's ever heard of IPSO? These are left-wing campaign groups writing in 20,000 letters.
So 20,000, that's the most ever, which suggests that you're right to say that not many people do generally campaign. But the point is, comparative to other episodes in the past, this has drawn real ire from people. And I think I can explain why. Rather than saying, you know, this group of people are bad, or Angela Rayner saying, you know, Tory scum, I think there is something...
Well, that was rude. I was very deeply offended by that comment from Angela Rayner.
There's a substantial difference between saying this group of people are bad and I think saying targeting an individual and outlining a particular course of action, which you just said with regards to Joe Brand and Nigel Farage too. I think that's qualitatively different, actually. I think that's a lot more violent and hateful. And then secondly...
Well, then battery acid.
No, I'm saying I agree that
you agree?
I agree that that's qualitatively different from saying Tory scum to saying this person deserves X. I think they're two different things. And then secondly, with Clarkson, this was drafted, written, edited, proofread and published. And so you've got 4 or 5 people down the chain of command thinking this is something which is appropriate to say, whereas with a tweet, you know, we all make errant tweets if somebody's rude or obnoxious. So I think it's strange to go from Clarkson saying this awful thing, which the Sun signed off on multiple levels, then saying left-wing people are bad. I think people that generally think they're really good people tend to be the worst kind of people. But I think that does transcend politics.
That happens a lot with socialists. Very sort of...
self-righteous.
Definitely, yes, self-righteous. Not all, but quite a lot.
Yeah, nearly all of them. I think it's the defining characteristic of the left.
Being nasty.
Is being nasty. And actually hating, you actually hating people who disagree with them, refusing to talk to them, refusing to have them in the family, saying, I wouldn't have this person in the family. Conservatives don't behave like that.
We can't say that of Aaron, of course.
No, we can't say that of Aaron, who's turned out, I've never met him before, to be astonishingly nice and interesting person. But they are tremendously hateful. And many of these comments that have been made have been edited, proofread and so on and appeared in newspapers on the left as well. So you can't just say that about... I'm not here to defend Jeremy Clarkson. And I know, of course, he has, of course, withdrawn to some extent from his... I don't know whether it's an apology or not, but he has recognised the shock that he's caused. But the fact is that I want the left, actually, to carry on being as nasty as they are, because people see it. The people see it and they say, you know, I really don't want to be part of this group. They really are putting me off. They see how unpleasant you are. It's a very long socialist tradition, even in the Labour Party. After the Second World War, there was, I think it was Nye Bevan, I hope I don't say the wrong politician, who went out in the 1945 election and actually talked about Tory vermin.
That was Nye Bevan, yeah.
That was Nye Bevan. And Tory vermin. And God bless them, the Tories up and down the country all got little badges saying, I am vermin.
Yes, I remember that.
Because they knew how... You don't remember that. I knew...
No, I remember
You're
when
remarkably
Tories got
well
badges
preserved.
saying Tory scum.
Yeah, and Tory
Similar.
scum and so on, because we know how to turn it back on people and show that we're not going to be affected by that. Because basically, we can live with other people. The left doesn't want to live with other people. They are the group of hate, not hope.
OK, well, let's get some balance on that one. What I will say is that I do think it's unfortunate that a lot of people on the left assume that Conservatives or those on the right have malintentions. That you see ridiculous things like, oh, the Conservatives just hate the poor. No, they just happen to think that the way to a prosperous economy or society is by different means. It always seems that if I, for example, disagree with someone who's left-wing on Twitter, that it's something nasty about my personality, something that they just can't stand. And it's not in the same way. I accept socialist views.
Well, there's 2 points to the answer here. Firstly, I don't think there's actually many Conservatives in this country. Most people who claim to be Conservative, I don't really know what they stand for. And that applies to most of the Conservative governments since 2010.
Yes, the party at least.
They certainly don't want to conserve anything. And I think just going on the evidence, they do seem quite committed to making things worse for most people. Is that intentional? I mean, of course, we can that's an open question. There was a line, I think it was from Macmillan, Conservatives conserve good things and change bad things. I mean, if only Conservatives were still like that, because they haven't been like that for a very long time. In terms of the virtue thing, it's really interesting because obviously I do media.
This is your last chance to speak, so...
Yeah, I'll be really... I'll try and be as succinct as possible. I do media stuff with people to both my left and my right, and what's interesting is the most kind of vitriol and anger I get is from people who are on the centre-left. I've always been perfectly affable with people on the right, and the people on the centre-left are the worst because they've been in the room for 20, 30 years and they're the most left-wing person. But the second there's somebody to their left, they view it almost as an attack on their identity and their being, which...
Well, we saw in the Corbyn years,
struck.
there was so much, inter-fighting. Anyway, that's sadly all we've got time for this evening. Thank you very much to my very erudite and fantastic panel this evening. Nigel Farage is coming up at the top of the hour. Nigel, you're there. What's coming up?
Thank you very much. 34 million car journeys to be taken over the course of the next 2 days, according to the RAC. Already the most expensive fuel in Europe. Diesel up to 30p a litre, dearer than unleaded. What on earth is going on? Because Rishi says he may put more taxes on fuel next year. Are motorists being persecuted? That's our debate this evening. All of that coming up after the all-important weather.
Good evening, I'm Alex Deakin and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office. A wet and windy spell of weather spreading northwards during tomorrow. Not great news if you're heading for the roads. Mostly it'll be dry during daylight hours across Scotland, where it'll be pretty chilly. But in the south, as well as being wet, there will be pretty mild conditions too. Weather fronts just trickling in here, made for a misty, murky day across much of the south. And that mist and low cloud just sticking around overnight. Quite foggy on some of the higher routes as well. Many places is dry until we see some heavier rain coming into the southwest by dawn. It's going to be very mild here, but colder conditions further north. Frost certainly across northern Scotland, and the showers coming in across Shetland will be turning to snow. But it'll be rain across the southwest. This will be quite heavy rain accompanied by gusty winds affecting Wales, the Midlands, southeast England during the morning. So just something to bear in mind if you are heading for the road. It's going to be very wet. That rain spreading steadily northwards into Northern Ireland, Northern England by early afternoon, and eventually into southern parts of Scotland. Further south, it turns drier and brighter through the afternoon, but still quite blustery and very mild, 13 degrees compared to just 2 or 3 in northern Scotland. Eventually that rain will hit the colder air across central and northern Scotland. Some snow likely on the hills during Friday evening. Showers will follow on behind, and the milder air will continue to push its way northward. So it's pretty mild for the start of the Christmas weekend. Yes, there will be some snow on the hills across northern Scotland, but otherwise it'll be rain showers. Not too many of those across central and eastern parts of England. Saturday generally dry and bright, but it will be quite blustery, a gusty day on Christmas Eve. And as I said, that milder air is continuing to push northwards. So double figures across the south, and 7, 8, 9 degrees further north is above average for this time of year. So it's a mild start to the Christmas weekend, a windy one as well. Staying mild for Christmas Day, but turning colder for all of us by Boxing Day.
I'm Mark Dolan. Join me at 11 on GB News for Headliners, in which I'll be joined by two of the UK's top comedians discussing tomorrow's papers. If it's an important story, we'll cover it, but we'll have some fun along the way. Headliners, the late night paper review that won't send you to sleep like the others will. 7 nights a week at 11 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Co. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So